Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb Riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I am the producer with the $71 trillion truth. And this is my 773rd offering on this channel, Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, which is part lecture, part therapy, part sermon, part self help therapy, I meant to say. And I'm recording this on Thursday, March 19th, 2026, approximately 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time, and everywhere in between, whatever that works out to be, as we all know, Mountain and Central. But let's not forget that it's not Standard Time, it's daylight time. So, anyway, we had spring forward, as I'm sure we all appreciate it. Love to have more sunlight during the afternoon, but not necessarily unbelievably warm temperatures. And I experienced a day yesterday where I felt like I was in a microwave for most of it. And yeah, the temperatures that we have now are more akin to the middle of the summer, let alone just the beginning of spring, which is usually winter where I live. So it's a good time to be fraught and distraught and confused and overwhelmed and all of those other things that 99% of you are. But more of you are starting to finally figure out that what I'm telling you is what you want to tune into. I have to thank all of the new follows that I see on Blue Sky. I'm so grateful that people are discovering me. It's just amazing from this standpoint, this part of the game for me. The more you learn about me, and I sound like a broken record most of the time because I'm just trying to get people to understand the tumor of corruption, which has metastasized the entire body of the United States and is destroying us. And we're in a death spiral, which we can all see, which a lot of people want to attribute to Trump. Trump is definitely the transactional Rico pedo con artist pig that he is, but he's wagged the dog. He was never the mastermind. He's been up to his eyeballs in grift his entire career, and he's been able to skirt accountability because of corruption. Or as Jesse Eisinger, the fantastic editor and journalist and author that runs basically ProPublica, who was in my work, The Con, by the way, and wrote a fantastic book called The Chicken Shit Club. We've just had a collapse of the legal profession over the course of the last 25 years. And surprise, that's what we're in the midst of. In fact, I just listened to a fantastic, uh, fantastic, it might be a little bit too much, but I just listened to a really compelling interview discussion between Mark Elias, of course, everybody's favorite, got to fight the gerrymandering, the Republicans thieving, stealing, and deceiving the election sort of guy that was once general counsel of Hillary Rodham Clinton's campaign. And he's a very smart guy, very involved. He's a very good guy. And he was interviewing George Conway, the former Republican who worked at a tall building law firm in Manhattan for his entire career, was famously married to Kellyanne Conway, who was, the White House press secretary, I believe, was her role. Actually, she wasn't press secretary. She was more like a communications scenario. I can't even remember what the title of Kellyanne the freak, who famously sat cross-legged, I should say, or on her knees in the Oval Office, which just kind of demonstrated her approach to all things the Trump presidency. But they got divorced, and Conway is now running for Congress out of Manhattan. And his whole platform is to impeach Trump. And he's got the goods and he's got really the right come from and everything else. And I quite frankly hope not only that he wins, but that he electrifies the senior leadership of the Democratic Party to do the same. But he also mentioned that the DNC, or Democrats writ large, actually, I'm not sure if he mentioned it. Maybe I just kind of interpret it this way, but they're waiting. They, meaning the DNC, the Democrats, the ones that have been there forever, the ones that I harp on all the time, basically their whole MO is that we're not Trump. And we're just going to win Congress by not being Trump. I'm telling you, that's a giant mistake. That's not a plan. That's not a platform. That's not a vision. That's requisite. what we're in the midst of. The plan is what's behind me. This is the plan requisite the corruption. And you'll understand why the more you get to know me. So I've proclaimed something, that is as volcanic as anything you've ever heard if you actually understand what it means. I told you I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth. The richest man on the planet is Elon Musk. He's approaching a trillion of net worth because he is, quite frankly, a what do we like to call him? He's a social welfare queen, and we haven't heard much from him since he announced during the breakup last July that he knew what was in the Epstein files. If you listen to this channel and my colleagues called the New Untouchables, you know that Bill Black had called out over 7 months ago that state legislatures have the power to subpoena Elon Musk and bring him in to discover what he knows and what he was saying. He actually admitted a quid pro quo, and most of you know that Elon Musk spent $277 million on Trump's campaign that probably raised over 1.5 billion, maybe 2 billion. I'm not sure what the total numbers were. He was the largest single contributor, but he revealed that it was a quid pro quo. And then we had Doge and we had whatever. And now Elon Musk is approaching, being a trillionaire, even though we know they're not selling more Teslas. There's a lot to that statement, and I could go on and on and on. But I'm going to try to stay hyper focused on the task at hand, which is to just simply, shall we say, first proclamate that Donald Trump has done more in 1 year to sell you the clean new deal than I've been able to do 4 years and 773 truth bombs nonstop to reveal to you what's going on. The analogy that I like to make all the time is that Trump is delivering this giant shit sandwich to everyone like waterboarding torture. To everyone. I literally mean everyone. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're like on the edge or maybe you had, I don't know, the floor of your life fall out from you underneath you and you're living on subsidized scenarios and maybe you're on Medicaid. Maybe you're searching for a job. Maybe you're homeless. Maybe you're this, that, and the other. You could be that person, or you could be, for example, a scientist with 30 years of research at a major university on one specified layer of renewable energy or climate science or something to that effect, or maybe something along the lines of medical research or anything innovative that suddenly you were caught in the crosshairs of Doge and you were laid off from the Department of Education, NOAA, I should say. I could go on and on and on. Meanwhile, the country is further collapsing in the midst of unbelievable military adventurism, all things considered. But for anyone who's been around the block for a while, like I have, particularly if you've been on this earth for some time, I'm 57 years old. I hail from the 80s. Born in the late 60s. I was born in 1968, a time of massive revolution, quite frankly, in the United States and all things that went with the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement and everything that would transcend from that. But we had the 80s. We had the go-go 80s. We had all sorts of lessons in one of the most influential films of my lifetime that summarized the whole thing, Gordon Gekko saying greed is good, and Oliver Stone's epic 1987 Wall Street, which actually influenced me to want to become a filmmaker. And ironically, I ultimately become an expert in financial corruption. It wasn't by design, I can assure you. It was by being forced that direction. And that's what my whole story is about. Further, we lived through 9/11, and then 9/11 and 25 years of war on terror that nobody had to fight except the 1% in our military, of which, I don't know, maybe, and I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass. I don't know the actual statistics, but I bet it probably mirrors, the general population in terms of those who serve. but probably 15 to 20% are minorities that went into the military service for one reason or another. Many of them to get opportunities for education and a leg up in life. And that's a different sort of scenario than probably the other 70 or 80% that might be legacy white, shall we say, officers slash whatever constitutes the white aspect of the United States military, which a lot of us now understand has been sort of a Christo-fascist scenario that also involves mercenaries for a very long time, following the leadership of the likes of Eric Prince, the Dark Lord of Blackwater, for example. And there's a lot that's taken place throughout this time period. But as we've all seen in the Epstein files, it's a lot of the same stuff that's happened over the course of decades that was never remedied. You remember I mentioned at the outset of this truth bomb that the law died a long time ago. Well, so did media. So did investigative journalism. That's why I became a muckraking journalist, documentarian that went on this grand odyssey where my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, was released 13 years ago. I made it in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And I rode the Occupy Wall Street movement all around this country to basically ask the question of what is the United States? What is the power paradigm? What does it mean in context to what I was taught my whole life, which culminated in me studying political science in college. And I also minored in journalism. And I've always been an activist, and I've always been inspired by the great journalists of my upbringing and writers and authors and everybody else. And I'm reminded of it all the time. And social media, when I get pings from great passages from Hunter Thompson, among all of the other wonderful authors of the late 60s and 70s, Jack Kerouac, inspired by Paul Cassidy and all of these other elements of just this independent. I mean, they were called back in the day, which led to Hunter Thompson. I mean, what were they? They were, I think, of the jazz artists and all of those kind of cool dudes that were independent, thought-provoking, and traveled and saw the world and experienced the world. And yeah, they were all happened to be alcoholics, and some became drug addicts like the great Hunter S. Thompson. But I digress, because they were really asking the question, what is power? And a lot of their influence, of course, was Vietnam and Watergate and all of those types of things. And yeah, that led to Gordon Gekko and the Go-Go 80s and everything that's happened since. And so I have been in the thick of this the entire time, my entire life. I love punk rock music. I love rock and roll. I love traveling. I love doing this, that, and the other. I loved reading and researching. And then I ended up becoming a producer. I worked in Hollywood. One thing led to another. I became independent. And then my life collapsed, and then I became an independent muckraking journalist because I wanted to know, again, what led me to Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. And I'll include a link to it below, and I highly encourage you to watch it, and your mind will be blown, because it'll be like, Jesus Christ, this was made yesterday. But the most infuriating thing, given, again, George Conway, on it, got to impeach Trump, got to take it to him, because if he wins and he doubles and triples down and gets even more entrenched than he already is, game over. There's only one focus of a guy like George Conway, and that's to take down Trump. And I applaud that. I think that's great. But where I'm coming from is that, and I would highly encourage those of you new to my feed to check out Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. Look into videos and look at popular. Just look down 2 or 3 and see my interviews with a journalist who's a Pulitzer winning journalist who's been around for 4 decades, a guy by the name of David K. Johnston, who is prolific from the standpoint is he is Donald Trump's most hated journalist because he had the story on Donald Trump 4 decades ago. Donald Trump has been breaking the law, working with the mafia, working with drug dealers, working with international gangsters for literally decades, that then led him to elevate into gangster countries that operate in a similar way, that launder money in the United States through real estate, which was all things Trump real estate that include Saudi, UAE, Emirates, and of course, all things Vladimir Putin. Okay. We've known this stuff for decades. We've known it since really, I'm going to say the savings and loan crisis and all things Atlantic City. And a lot of people knew about all things Trump, Epstein at that time period. But nobody ever did the work of investigations with the Department of Justice and the FBI to basically put all of these scenarios down as they are mandated, because that's the whole point of these institutions. And if you're not already aware, the Department of Justice has like 120,000 employees, right? Take it back, minus 13,000 that have quit because they can't work for Trump. And I've said many times in some of these truth bombs, I don't think it's better to quit. I think it's better to stay inside, become a whistleblower and blow this stuff up. And oh yeah, by the way, if you watch my truth bombs with the new Untouchables, you know that we work with the premier whistleblower apparatus in the Beltway that have access to stories that are mind-boggling, stories that we precipitate prior to 60 Minutes, before they were destroyed by all things CBS hostile takeover of Larry Ellison and Barry Weiss, the one-time influencer that's now running the entire network. And I think she's 37 years old. And oh yeah, by the way, a lesbian. Not like there's anything wrong with that. But we're in a war for oil at a time where all of the corruption that I've been revealing to you that's taken place in the shadows for now decades is literally in the open in front of your face, hence the giant shit sandwich Trump is waterboarding you with. And if you were in a silo in an ivory tower in research in one of those gazillions of departments that I mentioned, you got fucked by Doge. And so now you're in the same situation, potentially, depending on how you've managed your money, as one of those poor fools that are on the street, for example. And more to come, as this economy is being train wrecked by this war on oil, which is the same war we've been involved with for now decades, that go back decades, that I'm in the middle of in the Clean New Deal remedies, period. You've got to wake the fuck up. And this is what I mean by that. You got to like, subscribe, and share. You got to follow. You got to become an activist for the Clean New Deal. If you want to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility, unlike, and consider that your birthday gift to the country. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. On its 250th anniversary of the American Revolution to create life, liberty, and justice and equality, and in order to form a more perfect union based on separation of powers because of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution that have all been now amidst a hostile takeover of a corporate fascist empire that are fueled by the billionaire class that have been there the whole time and that are the recipient of the information that I'm revealing to you. I don't shout all the time. It's not why my voice is scratchy today. I don't know why it is. I think I might be having some allergies or something. But yeah, man, it is time to wake the fuck up, okay? I'm going to share my screen, and I want to just start with some headlines, and then I'm going to build into things for you to take away from this, because it's not just me saying it. It's the whole world that's saying, but without the details that I'm providing. So first of all, U.S. confronts energy crisis as attacks rattle markets. Why is oil so central to the global economy? First and foremost, we got off the gold standard in 1971. We created fiat currency during Bretton Woods, but that was attached to basically the flexibility and the mighty commodity of oil as the new gold standard. That's gone through some fits and starts, starting with, of course, the oil embargo of OPEC in the mid 70s, which I've heard a lot of folks recently go, yeah, this reminds me of the 70s. Yeah, it's the same thing as the 70s 5 decades ago, because it's always about oil. Because when you tether the dollar to oil as the commodity that all things are traded on, the United States became the global reserve currency in the first net net negative in terms of our surplus, not my surplus, our exports versus our imports. We're export light, import heavy. The deficit is what I'm trying to talk about. With monumental deficits, railroad the entire world into reinvesting into all things U.S. treasuries, which puts the dollar as the exorbitant privilege as the world's reserve currency tethered to oil. So that's first and foremost. A quick aside, right after 9/11, it turned out that then Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan immediately took a trip to the Suez Canal, not to be confused with the Strait of Hormuz, of which everybody's talking about today as a result of all things this war in Iran, which is blasting oil prices to the moon, which is benefiting of all things Russia, that are now escaping all of the U.S. Basically mandates. I'm trying to think of the term that we were preventing countries from purchasing, or all manner of shape or form, really giving a big hit to Russia's oil industry, which has now got a huge hit bump up because of prices. And that may be very well why MBS and Vladimir Putin were smiling in that famous picture several years ago. But it's right here. And the Pentagon seeks $200 billion to fund Iran war. Obviously, we know from the big, beautiful bill on the tax cut to billionaires, and now they're going to get rid of Medicaid and Medicare and healthcare to millions of Americans and all of these other things, and blowing up the Department of Education and public schooling and science initiatives and everything else that makes us a superpower. The Pentagon is going to get $200 billion. This on top of revelations a couple of weeks ago that Donald Trump is allowing Wall Street, hedge funds and private equity and this, that, and the other advisors to now literally get inside the Pentagon, as opposed to from afar through, shall we say, channels of what I've identified for a long time, the military industrial complex and guys like the Carlyle Group, which act exactly as that. And by the way, the Carlyle Group is where the our Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, came out of. I think he was general counsel, top attorney for the Carlyle Group. Okay? You see the sort of consortium there? Not to mention, Sullivan and Cromwell was the law firm from Wall Street that was there to dig out of the 2008 great financial crisis, and in their words, on behalf of the consortium, which turned out to be the too big to fail banks. And Sullivan and Cromwell was the same New York white shoe law firm that created the CIA. Hey, go figure. So you move down in the effect of oil prices, and then this is my favorite. Saudi officials warn patience is limited as Iran attacks barrage the kingdom. Yeah, this thing could get bigger and, I don't know what, nuclear in short order. And what are these guys who are the oligarchs in complete control with their bunkers and private islands and this, that, and the other really care about the population of the world? Not much, as demonstrated by the last 25 years. And contradicting Trump, Israeli officials say U.S. was told about the South Pars attack. Okay, I don't know what that's about, except President Trump said the United States knew nothing. Colonel, is it Schultz? I know nothing. But, moving forward, I mean, here's one that I'm going to address here. Go big and go loud inside the Justice Departments to push and prosecute protesters. Look, this is all tied to this ICE mammoth budget that's larger than the Marines. And of course, we were sending a Marine, what do they say, a contingency, division or something like that, expedition division to Iran, and they've got less budget than ICE, and they're building warehouses. And we know all things Minneapolis and Chicago and Los Angeles, and building gulags, at this for a frantic pace, and I've got wind that they're doing it secretly without states approving it, that's one side of the fence. How many of you, by a show of hands, remember I've said from the very beginning of these truth bomb riffs, corruption fuels, births, and fuels fascism. Okay, well, where's the corruption? Oh, where is the corruption? Well, as demonstrated last night on Lawrence O'Donnell, one piece of the corruption is this guy that was involved with $1 billion fraud, and Trump pardoned him alongside J6 rioters and so on and so forth. But man, is it a glorious time to be a fraudster with all things pardoned. And also, in a few truth bombs ago, I did an amazing special breakout session with Bill Black on the New Untouchables, featuring how crypto is being used to basically end round pardons for all of these fraudsters that Trump is letting out of prison. So one of these guys, actually, I want to go to this page right here. Where was it? God, I know his name. Let's see if his name is here. David Gentile. That's a funny name. This guy, apparently, David Gentile, is involved with a Medicare fraud, a giant Medicare fraud, and he was on the hook for $50 million of restitution, and he was supposed to be 12 days into prison when he was offered clemency, and I'm not sure what his conviction was. It might have been something like 20 years. Anyway, he just got freaking pardoned by Trump after incredible damage in a giant Ponzi scheme, stealing money from people. What that indicates is it doesn't matter what's going on until it happens to you. That's the bottom line with most Americans. But it's happening to more and more people more frequently, which is astounding considering where we came from. And people still always take the bait. Everybody wants to make as much money as possible with less work as possible without doing their due diligence. And then they start crying when they get burned. No, you can't sit on the sideline with your heads in the sand and lose all of your hard-earned wealth for your retirement to give it over to Trump, who's sending us to war to create more problems with the affordability crisis while he's getting billions backdoored to him illegally that no one can stop. So, look, man, Trump, it's this golden age for fraudsters. This is on the front page of the New York Times as well today, right? This is, I'm going to read a little bit of this to you, but the title or the headline is, if I can get there, Trump vowed to crack down on fraudsters, but he's pardoned dozens. He's got a Department of Fraud led by J.D. Vance, the eyeliner VP that works for, of all things, Peter Thiel and everything that represents. But as I've explained also and expressed millions of times, Trump's entire calculus is lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. Every accusation is a confession. Here, he's creating this fraud department to go after fraudsters that aren't like him. In fact, he's pardoning all the fraudsters that are like him. So Solomon Melgen was an immigrant who came to the United States and wound up committing fraud, ripping off American taxpayers by $42 million. Melgen devised a scheme to enrich himself by defrauding Medicare to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars, an FBI official said, when Melgen was sentenced to 17 years in jail during the president's first term. Given the high-profile war on fraud and government programs that Mr. Trump announced on Monday, pointing to scams allegedly carried out by Somali and other immigrants, Mr. Melgen might have prominent place in the president's rogue gallery of fraudsters. But Mr. Melgen is actually prominent in another presidential lineup, the gallery of criminals convicted of fraud who have been granted clemency by Mr. Trump. Across both of his terms, Trump has granted clemency to more than 70 allies, donors, and others convicted in fraud cases. In his second term, Mr. Trump's pace of pardoning those convicted of fraud has increased. In the first year of his second term, he handed out nearly 36 pardons and commutations for people accused of fraud. Mr. Trump is unabashed in using the government to reward friends and supporters and punish foes. Still, his handling of fraud cases stands out. Not only are these striking similarities between some of the crimes that were prosecuted and those that were pardoned, but the president also has executed some of those, excused, sorry, not executed, excused some of those who have stolen the most. Exhibit A is Philip S. Formas, the South Florida owner of a nursing and assisted living facility. It was arrested in 2016 in what the FBI called the largest criminal healthcare fraud case brought against an individual. The fraudulent billing scheme stole $1.3 billion from Medicare and Medicaid, the same type of public entitlement programs the president says he is protecting with crackdown on fraud in Minnesota and elsewhere. But Mr. Trump commuted Mr. S. Formas a 20-year sentence in 2020 after lobbying campaign by well-connected lawyers and public figures, and announcing the commutation, which left in place $5.5 million in restitution. A statement from the White House said Mr. Formas had devoted his time in prison to prayer and repentance. The war on fraud seems like a war on specific fraud committed by a specific kind of people, said Elizabeth Oyer, who was fired as the Justice Department's pardon attorney after she said opposing restoring gun rights on Mel Gibson, the actor and prominent supporter of Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump himself was found liable in a civil fraud case related to his business, and he has rallied against what he views as politically motivated cases targeting him and his allies. The president, Mr. Oyer said, is partial to fraud committed by people in whom he sees something of himself. He sees wealthy and successful businessmen, and he sees something of himself in him. That's called affinity fraud, ladies and gentlemen. In Minnesota, the Justice Department, beginning in the Biden administration, has charged nearly 100 people with defrauding a variety of government programs, including stealing hundreds of millions of dollars intended for child nutrition programs during the corona pandemic, a period marked by a wave of scams involving federal money. A recent assessment by federal prosecutors suggested that since 2018, more than half of the $18 billion in taxpayer funds spent on 14 state programs in Minnesota was likely stolen. The vast majority of people who have been charged are of Somali descent, which Mr. Trump has cited as justification for his immigration crackdown in Minnesota. Look, I could go on that case, but first of all, 50% of the programs during COVID stolen is part and parcel to everything that was going on during the PPP loan fraud scenario. And I believe that Donald Trump's administration got the message to all of the criminals out there, go ahead and steal with impunity. I really believe that. I don't have the evidence of that, but it seems corollary and parallel to everything that's shaking out now. But in addition to this, guys, I saw from Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy, and his Republican cohort from Texas, whose name I can't remember, but they have a new bill to try to prevent it's like predictive markets. Predictive markets. There were people that made out like bandits on the very exact day Trump waged war on Iran. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are speculating. We don't know why Trump decided to have the war now versus later, in all things, the wake of Venezuela, pre-Cuba, threatening Greenland, all of these others insane things that are happening in addition to ICE, that there are these predictive markets that Donald Trump's children are involved with, and they're banking on inside information that nobody can stop. And we also know that Trump has backdoored over $1 billion since the first, that we can forensically audit. That's illegal because of the nature of all things emoluments clause in the Constitution, but because we have a corrupt Supreme Court, because we have a corrupt Congress, the Republicans aren't going to do anything that they've sworn oath to in the Constitution because they're criminal whores, pimps, junkies, and parasites that are all part of the thriving, pardons of fraudsters that are feasting on the dead whale carcass of the dying American dream. And what are you doing? What are you doing? Who are you supporting? What platform are you pressing forward? Why are you behind, let's say, Bernie Sanders, who said he's got a plan for $4.7 trillion restitution in taxes to be able to help the working class and, turn the tables on the big, beautiful bill, supposedly. But he's never, ever once, even though he knows about all of it, revealed the $71 trillion truth that I have. That was the precursor to all of this. Okay. Same with AOC, same with Elizabeth Warren. When I heard George Conway talk about we have to impeach, 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 I don't even hear them saying that. I don't even hear, they're saying how horrible Trump is, but they're not saying they're going to impeach Trump. Why would that be? And we talk about the Epstein files, this, that, and the other. And yeah, and I've said it a million times in my truth bombs, and I happened to watch it last week. As impressed as I was by the testimony of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and they were pros compared to the idiots from the Republicans that asked them questions. There's no way in hell Clinton or Clintons didn't know who Jeffrey Epstein was and what he was doing. There's no way in hell. And same with all things Les Wexner, and the list goes on. I think they're going to subpoena Bill Gates, which is interesting. And I haven't seen anything about Bill Gates being involved with children, but he definitely was involved with Epstein, and there's a lot to that. And you got to ask yourself, why are all of the biggest, most powerful, richest, most connected financial interest in the entire globe all part of the Epstein files? It's a rhetorical question. But moving forward. So this was the article I talked about earlier. So in the midst of all of this stuff, there's hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars, even though we just saw Kristi Noem get axed. But this guy, whose name eludes me at the moment, Wayne, I think his name, is going to replace Kristi Noem, who was doing the Mile High with Lewandowski while they're murdering American citizens and throwing people into gulags or prisons in Central America and yada yada yada. She's got the gall to fly on a fucking G4 on our dime and was looting $200 million with Lewandowski. And she's going to go unpunished. She got, fired off the island. Okay, but where is the remedy for Kristi Noem, for example? And how about Pam Bondi? Everybody's talking about Pam Bondi, even MAGAs. Pam Bondi sold them out. Pam Bondi is protecting a pedo. Pam Bondi this or that. Pam Bondi's job was to do this from the beginning. She did this for the banks, particularly U.S. Bank, which I've demonstrated in my truth bombs forever, back in the great financial crisis. And then she, covered for Trump and all things, Mar-a-Lago, and it turns out Epstein. And as it turns out, she was even involved, I think, with some manner, shape, or form of the situation with Trump University and many other things. And she was playing ball the whole time. That's why she got chosen to become general counsel of Trump's personal defense firm, which went from a bunch of jokers to basically the Department of Justice and 120,000 employees. Are you pissed off yet? There's more. Okay, so in addition to all of this insanity of corruption, inside collusion, and liars at the highest levels of our government, what is Trump going to do for the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution? Well, he's going to have a complete connection to all things evangelicals. He has an emphasis on the role of religion in the founding. That's what this is all about. This is the Christo-fascist, evangelical, Christian Zionist connection to control white supremacy for the Confederacy and the racketeering pedo protection racket of all things Donald Trump. Yeah, it almost leaves you speechless, right? And as we're approaching Easter and the notion of redemption, or if you're Jewish, in Passover and Exodus from bondage, all of these things have played out with the characters that should be on the side of liberation and truth and redemption are on the side of lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate, rape and repeat, and steal and loot and destroy everything while polluting and poisoning the world and potentially leading us into World War III, and the remainder being, mopped up and thrown into gulags. And what are you doing? What are you doing? Who are you supporting? Why? Do you even know how to put this stuff together? Did you know that we have, a November, is elections and the midterms, where every member of Congress Every seat in Congress is up for grabs and about half the Senate. If we were able to take back Congress with a plan, we could turn the tables on this monstrosity of corruption and usher in the Clean New Deal. As I said before, I've been after this for 4 years. Everything I'm in the midst of goes back to the Obama administration, although it goes back way longer than that. And you can all see that in the fact of the Epstein files. Need I remind you of the Epstein class? And the media all sat on all this information on Epstein the whole time, and they all sat on the information that I'm revealing to you, and is the reason why I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth that interacts with the greatest legal minds in our country who have spent decades taking down fraudsters in the S&L crisis and Enron and WorldCom and Medicare fraud and this, that, and the other. But they couldn't take down all of Wall Street in the 2008 great financial crisis because that's when the criminals took over. They overwhelmed the system's ability to combat that. And then the nature of the revolving door, scenario where Obama came in riding the white horse of change we could believe in on a mandate that was very similar to what FDR had back in 1933. What did he do? He put all the people that created this madness into position to clean up the madness for themselves. And I wasn't the only one paying attention. That's what my work reveals from Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream through the con. I can tell you that the Heritage Foundation was paying attention. All things Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson and the Koch brothers, and of course, Vladimir Putin and MBS, to name a few. They all realized the law was dead, that the United States had lost its ability to thwart widespread organized crime. And by the way, as much as I want to criticize and really condemn Obama for so much of this, it was a runaway train wreck during Bush. Everything 9/11 forward is the world of the oligarchs. I know a lot of people want to sort of, run away from the notion of conspiracy theory. First and foremost, conspiracy is racketeering. It happens all the time. We have remedies for that. We've used the remedies in many cases. It was then New York Southern District Attorney Rudolph Giuliani that used racketeering to take it next level to create the RICO statutes that dealt with the 5 families of the mob in New York. And then we used them again, not as hard as we could have with Michael Milken and all things, junk bonds back in the 80s. But everything that we've been involved with, from quite frankly, Enron and the 2000, tech bubble and WorldCom and many of these other, they're racketeering. There's different ways you can execute the law on this whole thing, but it just depends on how they want to carry out the case. I've learned about control fraud, and I understand all the different elements of different specificity of fraud that doesn't necessarily have to be RICO, because that is a little bit difficult depending on your resources and everything else and your time. But what the con reveals is the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world that never ended, which is the $71 trillion truth that has now enabled this glorious golden age of corruption right in front of our face that Trump is getting away with to enrich himself beyond comprehension, to steal the election again, or maybe create martial law, depending on how the war in Iran goes, and ultimately game over. Unless millions of you find a way to pay attention, and if you're smart, and if you have a college education or even a higher education or a higher degree, dig into everything I'm revealing to you. Question me, challenge me. If you're a journalist, discover me. And understand that I'm raising my voice, because who the hell is going to tell this story if I don't? Which brings everything together, because the nature of media, particularly on social media, is they follow the algorithm. What is the crazy thing now? What's everybody following? And then there's influencers, and there's pump and dump schemes by way of, amplifying certain accounts, throttling down others, all of the other way. The only way to break through this carnage of madness. And by the way, just to further amplify my credibility, honestly, our story was quashed, AKA, if you know anything about Alvin Bragg and Fonnie Willis and the 34 criminal convictions that happened to Trump, based on the 2020 or 2016 election that didn't take him down, that should have, if they were coordinated in Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, which they weren't, because Merrick Garland freaking blew it, all things considered. And that's what I did with the con, for example. But what it led me to believe, because or understand, even though I'm still a muckraking journalist, I'm still conveying all of the stories that are happening now, because they're extremely important as we're seeing the consolidation of media, which we've had for 25 years, which destroyed investigative journalism, that's leading to the death knell of the billionaire class that are taking over all mainstream media, that I guarantee are backstop. And they're also, convoluted with, not convoluted, they're in partnership with the mergers and acquisition people, both at the tall building law firms and all of the major financial institutions that are big too to fail, that we've given $71 trillion illegally to destroy tens of millions of people, using the courts to do it. That's what I'm revealing that allowed all of this to happen. So a couple of things that I want to read just before I get into the conclusion of this. So check this out. I got printed in the New York Times twice today, which is amazing. I get printed in the New York Times in their comment section pretty frequently, but I got two big ones today. And the first one I want to read, this was in relation to Trump vowed to crack down on fraudsters. It's the article that I read to you. But he's pardoned dozens. I said, I'm just waiting for him to pardon Maxwell, Diddy, and Weinstein. Seriously, New York Times, fraud took down the world in 2008 with tens of millions of felonies that led to Wall Street getting tens of trillions illegally. No one went to jail of significance. Because of that monstrous mistake, the bad guys got the message loud and clear. The law is dead. Add this to all things Epstein, and we've got Trump and all that goes with it. Who am I? I'm the dude with the answers. I'm Patrick Lovell. Look me up. Can you believe the New York Times printed that? I think it was a mistake that they printed that. I bet you they delete it later, but that was amazing that they did that. And that's, of course, and I actually gifted this article on my Blue Sky if you want to check it out. But this is what it says. Trump vowed to crack down fraudsters, and now he's pardoned dozens. And I read you half the article. This is another comment that I got published today, which I thought was pretty amazing. This administration is betting on insider information to profit on war while backdooring billions through crypto, while selling pardons, while destroying the law and building detention camps. If I were the editor-in-chief, I'd be delivering the details of those stories alongside what the FBI is covering up by way of the 302s, etc. R.E. Trump's alleged rape of children. The idea of a paramilitary junta targeting literal anti-fascists, not to be confused with Hamas, mind you, while the carnage of corruption destroys any semblance of the law, has thrown our country into a death spiral. We're not coming out of until Trump's corruption is the lead. Okay, guys, this is Armageddon. Okay, this is the rapture. This is, ironically, the whole fusion of the biblical construct that there's going to be the final battle between good and evil, because evil swimming in malevolent lies that turn everyone into diabolical complicit demons in the darkness is going to be met with the requisite force of the light. And in this case, in rapture, it's, Jesus and the rapture, which is, basically making the world safe for Jesus, not safe, but it's just the conditions for Jesus to return, to then suddenly usher in this, millennia of peace is the idea, right? Ironic that the people that are doing that between the Netanyahu Jewish supremacists of Zionism, that seems to be the buzzword, that's kind of a catch-all, and there's more to it than that, because I support Israel, but not Netanyahu and corruption because of the Holocaust and yada, yada, yada. But it's all about lies. And I'm providing you the light of truth. and I'm not your savior. The salvation is the truth that I am revealing to you that ushers in the clean new deal. If you and me and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency and sustainability and liberty and beauty and opportunity and equality and all of those things, when we merge in unity behind the clean new deal, we will purge the misery of tyranny to unleash the renaissance of possibility. We have got to connect with everybody running for office. Yesterday, I discovered, because of the New York Times front page article, a brilliant candidate out of the mayor's office of Scranton, Pennsylvania, hometown, of course, of President Biden, former President Biden. And her name is Paige Cognetti, Paige Against the Machine. Her whole platform was to fight corruption. Now, ironically, she's a very, very intelligent and capable woman who came out of Harvard and I guess was in the Obama Treasury. But then she circled out of it and was so disgusted by corruption that became her platform, and she's been doing it. Now she's running for Congress against a guy who supposedly ran against corruption on the Republican side, but turns out he was against insider trading in Congress. Turns out he's the largest trader in Congress, or at least top five. Okay? Lie, deny, switch the blame, implicate. It just insane, blame the victim sort of thing. These guys are all heavyweight liars. That's it. And the law is predicated on evidence to tell the truth, to hold people in jeopardy and then conviction if the evidence justifies it in a court of law. But the law is dead. So what do? Well, the people have got to rise with the truth, where they can't piss on your head telling you it's rain because they thought you were some kind of new fool. When you become a nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth I'm dropping, we force the light of truth into the depravity of darkness. And so what are we going to do? We're going to turn qualified immunity on its head. Why should the cops be able to shoot to kill and not be held accountable? I'm not against the cops being able to shoot to kill. I thought they should have done much more of it on January 6th, but they didn't. Why are the judges above the law? The judges can't just be held to a standard of ethics and a canon of ethics. They got to be responsible if they are corrupt, as the entire Supreme Court is. And I've made that case a million times. And because of their corruption, they gave us Donald Trump. Don the Con, Rico, Pedo, Pig, the Mad Magazine Mad King, forcing a giant shit sandwich down your throat like it's waterboarding torture. How much can you take? And of course, they do it vis-a-vis the Electoral College, which is the tool of gerrymandering and being able to provide the minority the ability to rule the majority. Okay? It's not democracy. They call it a constitutional republic. I call it corporate fascism, undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. Therein lies the precepts of the Clean New Deal. We're not a democracy. We don't function as a capitalistic system. We're socialism for criminal billionaires, i.e. the Epstein class. How do you remedy this? Because this has been 4 decades in the making. And all of the stuff that's been in the shadows, quite frankly, and periodically in our face from time to time, has happened throughout the last 4 decades. But it's led to this monumental destruction of what the actual law was and all of the regulations and all of the policy that we had in play, that deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization took over starting in the Clinton presidency, really in the Reagan presidency. And it goes as far back in terms of interest rate swaps and so forth during the Carter administration. But it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. One on overdrive during the Bush administration that created forever wars on really insane scenarios when you consider 9/11. In 9/11, we knew where the terrorist cells were. We knew who were funding them. We could have thwarted it very easily, but the agencies weren't talking to each other because the higher-ups wouldn't allow it. It's called asymmetric information. You can manipulate the outcome when the fish rots from the head. That's what we're in the midst of. So we're going to create a new Glass-Steagall to prevent the full faith and credit of the United States from being able to create liquidity on a global basis for criminal racketeers. Does that sound pretty reasonable? Because that's what I'm telling you we did. That's the $71 trillion truth since 2009. We backdoored. That was all before COVID. We provided 33 trillion, which it could be 29 trillion, 33 trillion in 2009, plus 16 trillion in quantitative easing. I could go into a whole dissertation about that. Then another 22 trillion during another run on a repo during 2019, right before the collapse, COVID. But that was because of crazy repo runs basically emanating from SoftBank in Japan, if you want to know the truth. Which is almost the exact same thing that triggered the 2008 great financial crisis, i.e. repo. And I could litigate that forever, as well as for those of you who are paying attention and know Maiden Lane is the biggest part of this. And by the way, that ties to Epstein, which is the gateway to the $71 trillion truth. Oh yeah, that was managed by Sullivan and fricking Cromwell. Okay? Like I said, the creators of the CIA. Go figure. Okay? So the opposite side of the coin of getting a new Glass-Steagall is a new citizen, or get rid of Citizens United. Ask victims of P. Diddy, does anything happen good in the shadows besides rooping and being raped? That's what Citizens United is doing in a very real way by shadow support of candidates and doing what they do in this revolving door of madness that has corrupted both sides of the House and obviously SCOTUS and now media. And it's been media for like 20 years, which is why I had to create the con, by the way. And so people, you've got to understand everything. This is just basically rebuilding the country that they destroyed. And you just finally getting in the hip how they did it. That's what we're doing. And the third precept is to demonstrate how they got away with 71 trillion. If you're a macroeconomic economist, if you're a PhD, if you're this, that, and the other, challenge me. Look at my material. Watch the con. See what I put in my up here at the top that you can go into, which are my white papers. If you go here, you'll get all of the evidence. Challenge me. I welcome it. And let's record. Let's see what you know versus what I know. I've got the fucking evidence. So good luck defeating me, but I challenge anyone. And I would go on any stupid revolving door, CNN, this, that, and the other, and make the case as well. But that's never going to happen. So it's got to happen between you, me, and everybody you see that takes this information and goes, have you heard of Patrick Lovell? He's the producer with the $71 trillion truth that can save us all. And he's not our savior. He's the deliverer. That's what this is all about. You're the savior. You are literally the savior when you have the truth. You're bulletproof and you're drinking from the fountain of youth. Moving forward, we got to upend this Roberts Court. We got to get 13 justices on the Supreme Court, play hardball, and then we got to hold the Roberts Court accountable. Okay? Then we're going to end qualified immunity, judicial immunity, and presidential immunity, all of which are just an abomination, literal abomination to the Constitution of the United States, while Trump and the evangelicals try to rewrite the Constitution on the 250th anniversary of the Constitution. This should be the shot heard around the world. And it is a peaceful revolution of truth against the madness of darkness, because we still have a shred of opportunity to win back the House, to make the government work of, by, and for the people, as opposed to of, by, and for the corrupt corporations, which is where I started my journey. And I said, I'm not expendable. Chances are you're not either. But if you've got your head in the sand and your ass in the back, they're going to frickin' take advantage of you every single time. You're just asking for it. But when you have the truth, you're a superhero. And they can't lie to you anymore. And so if you're into Medicare for all, if you're into renewable energy paradigm, if you're into science, technology, education, where are we going to find the money? It's not about where are we going to find the money. We're a fiat currency, and Congress presumably has the power of the purse. They can budget for anything. But what we've done is we've made the Federal Reserve the power of the purse for the Epstein class, that none of you understand how it works. We're going to end that if we get everybody to run on a crusade of anti-corruption and anti-fascism for restoring the rule of law by kneecapping the robber baron and Confederate class. That's who these clowns are. It's absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. We've known that since 17th century France, which was imperialism, which they're trying to reconstitute. Imperialism. What is the East Wing ballroom? And why is Trump, all things, you can't make this satire up in National Lampoon or in the brilliant Monty Python. Trump is waging a subpoena war against, even though he got thwarted by Judge Boasberg, on Jerome Powell for, egregiously budgeting, which is cause for firing, a remodel of the Federal Reserve. When meanwhile, Jerome Powell was involved with insider trading, among other things. And he came from the Carlyle Group, and he doesn't represent we the people. He represents the Epstein class. So there's no good guy in that fight, okay? Trump is just trying to get a hold of, more power in the Federal Reserve to further double down on just, hey, I'm going to get trillions for myself. Why wouldn't he? That's been the end game since what happened in 2008. That's when they all figured it out. And then finally, we got to end the Electoral College, institute term limits for the U.S. senators and representatives so we don't have tyranny, and then ultimately prohibit all insider trading for all members of Congress and the Supreme Court and all agencies. Listen, guys, the time is now. We've got to build the plane and fly it at the same time. But there is no time. It's a paradox. I've been trying to beat this drum into your head, and I've been thwarted by the algorithm. I've been thwarted by people who live in the four walls of their existence, who share lies, buy lies. I'm asking you to stop buying lies. This is the truth and nothing but. We gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally to a global criminal racketeering enterprise that took over our government. And then the real criminals that aren't afraid to go to jail, that have been doing racketeering forever, that are all of these guys that Trump is now pardoning, which should disgust you, as he's also circling the wagons around pedos. If you don't teach your children to lie, cheat, and steal to get through their school or to actually get anywhere in life, if you would never do that, and you believe in accountability and you believe in, maybe eternal damnation, you cannot sit on the sidelines. You've got to become a crusader for truth. That's what this is. And I used to think that language is hyperbolic and, you got to be careful what you say and what you do and what you put out there, but not at this stage. The corruption, the malfeasance, the death, the destruction, the projection of further fascism and potentially World War III should be enough to rattle you into action. I'm not about fools who cry misery, which I reflexively refer to as tools in the fool circus. I'm about dynamic, systemic, smart, actionable people who get shit done, who achieve. That's who I'm looking for to join this. We don't need 300 million Americans. We need 3.5% of the people. And then we will create a revolution of truth for democracy and to reboot the American dream on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And like George Conway says, if Trump wins and we get martial law and all of these things get, pushed aside, they get worse and worse and worse and worse. And we're Russia, which means a gas station with nuclear weapons, okay? Run by a bunch of fat mafia pigs. We're better than that, America. This is in order to form a perfect union. This is to purge tyranny. This is to cleanse the lies. And I recognize that populism has been used for massive destruction in history. In fact, the Nazis used a lot of that sort of dialogue, but in service to what? Hitler corruption, and quite frankly, their Epstein class, which is kind of ironic that he stole from the German people to create a war to destroy everything, in which destroyed himself at the time period. There's no good outcome from this, but there is nothing but unbelievable opportunity from what I am revealing to you. This is the greatest opportunity of the last 4 decades to get this right, to turn the tables, and to march forward under the banner of truth so that we reboot the American dream. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. Please interact. Please challenge me if you have questions, or join us, more importantly, and tell me you're all in, and share everything that we have and get on board. And for those of you who want to wear your colors, we've got incredible shirts and what do we call it? Swag. We've got handkerchiefs for dogs. We've got coffee mugs. We've got this, that, and the other that has all of this so that you can show that you're anti-MAGA if you're interested. And all of that we ultimately assemble, because we are a 501c4, is going to go to fund candidates to run on the Clean New Deal. We've got to do this together. And I swear to God, if you are anybody that's like anti-Trump, anti-MAGA, and you think that Bernie Sanders and AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer and everybody is going to save the day, they're not. The one who's got the best ideas, quite frankly, in my opinion, is both Jamie Raskin and Ro Khanna. They're really bright and smart, but they're not willing to take on a comprehensive, requisite battle to create the Clean New Deal unless millions of us get behind this. And then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, you know what? Mea culpa. We're going to admit all of they're kind of getting there with the Epstein files. They're like, oh yeah, every administration failed. Every attorney general failed, but we're dealing with this now. Okay. Thanks for showing up 20 years late. Okay. I do want to see some remedy for the victims of the Epstein files, but they never say, and they really should if they were transparent and true. And I'm not saying this is a but caveat, but I'm saying this is true. A majority, from what I understand, of the Epstein victims took cash settlements. They were forced cash settlements to sign NDAs and to basically walk away. That's what the Biden administration was doing. Because they didn't want to unleash all of this information that involved the biggest banks in the United States and the biggest hedge funders and the biggest tech titans and everything else that is the deep state. So they wanted to freaking do what they always do, sweep it under the rug and have it go away. But now they're utilizing it because they know it's the one Achilles heel for Trump, because MAGA is just as disgusted by it as anybody who's not MAGA. But then again, MAGA is malleable. Okay. Anyway, I've said enough, and my voice got stronger too, I think. Anyway, thanks for listening. Again, I'm doubling down. I'm trying to do these things every single day to the best of my ability, in between millions of other things that I've got going on. So thank you to all of you who lasted this long and listening. I've got 774 truth bomb riffs for you to check out what I've been doing the whole time over the last 4 years. And I actually have an 11-hour platform that's called 11-1-23. I did it in the 23. What did I call it? I can't even remember the name of it, but I have an 11-hour Mr. Smith Goes to Washington with all of the whistleblowers, all of the, all of the evidence, this, that, and the other, that reveals to you what the entirety of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, AGs around the country, the entire government couldn't do. That doesn't make me walk on water, my friends, but I promise you the Clean New Deal is the staff of truth that can deliver. Well, I think we're right in the middle of the plagues, by the way, to stay with the theme. This is how we redeem ourselves and get to the promised land. Thank you for listening. Onwards and upwards.